Hello, everybody. Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And guess what? A very kind and regular correspondent and a friend of ours pointed out in an email this week that this recording, if you count the ones we did where we were operating every day back in severe COVID time, and these, which are the Sounding Shadows, we have reached 200.
200.
That's extraordinary. And I never thought of that as we came up to it, but I suppose it's something, isn't it? I mean, I'd love to have scored 200 in cricket. That's the only thing I can think of. But
I think the irony is, and maybe it's not an irony, maybe it's exactly how it should be, but instead of a sort of balloons and sort of party to celebrate it, we're actually sitting in a travel lodge. We do have a glass of wine, don't we, in a plastic wine glass.
We know how to live, I can tell you.
Because we are in transit between the home we've been in for 5 years and the home we hope to be in, if all goes well, by tomorrow evening. And anybody who's moved knows that it throws you into a totally strange, peculiar land.
Well, it gets you on so many different levels that it's almost impossible to identify what's going on. But and it is a mystery what will happen tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be sleeping in a different house, and we have no idea. But we think it's a good house, and we're happy about that. And we've got our dog here sitting with us.
We have.
Who loves to be with us when we do these recordings, and so from that point of view, it's okay.
And in a way,
it's
I think,
okay.
and I did use the wrong word when I said ironically, because I think it's absolutely typical of these 2 years, really, that we are in another state of total uncertainty as to what the next stage will be. I mean, it's been like that, really, for all of us, for ever since we started these recordings, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've been through some deeply dark times and some wonderful times, haven't we? All sorts of things. Many people know I was very ill last year, towards the end of last year. No, not last year, the year before.
Exactly.
The year has gone.
Exactly.
And that was a shock for me on two levels. One, because I was ill, and one, because I'd never been in hospital before. And some of the dread I had, I know some of you have been in hospital far too many times, but it was quite scary and strange in the end. I mean, I thank God for the hospital. So there was that. What else has happened to us?
Well, if you're going back to the beginning, anybody who's followed our journey, as we have followed several of your journeys, will know that it was, I don't know, there was something about us doing a Monet jigsaw that lasted forever. And then we had our puppy arrive.
Right. A Claude Monet jigsaw. Yeah.
And then our puppy, who was an absolute Houdini, and we shared some of the... can you remember any of them? Can you remember that?
Well, this time,
puppy kept escaping whatever we tried to do.
We tried to build a sort of an artificial cage in the kitchen.
Yes.
The time people might remember, which we described, was when finally I knew I'd done it, and I felt quite happy that it had happened, and went upstairs.
You were smug.
Bridget was in bed, and I sat on the bed. And I said, yes, it was a bit smug. I said, I think I've done it. I cannot see how Gracie can possibly get out of that.
And then you said...
Then I turned and saw her sitting and looking at me. And so she got out, come upstairs, got through the door, decided to sit, looking even more smugly than I was.
But it was the way you said, hello, Gracie.
Hello, Gracie, I said, yes. So she's listening to me now. Yeah, there was that.
Then I managed to break my ankle by falling on the smallest slope ever invented. And that was
a terrible break, though.
It was quite a bad break, but it was followed by the fact that not only did we have the puppy, but also just before Christmas I was in this wheelchair, then our boiler burst just before Christmas. I don't know. Maybe we're cataloguing a list of of strange things, and yet I know that for everybody it's been such an unusual time.
Yeah, and
in so many ways.
It's still, I mean, we talk about sounding the shadows, not knowing where to land. It may be, we were quoting, what's the name of the fellow who wrote the sounding the
No Shore
Inside thing, Oswald Chambers, talking about centrally to his view of faith that importantly, you reach a point where there is no shore in sight and no success, and actually you're in the right place because you're then totally dependent on seeing Jesus walking on the water. That's what he said, and I don't know how you unwrap that and turn it into real life, which is a very difficult thing to handle. But I think we've certainly been through some of that. And it's hard to make the decision, I think. Something about that commitment is really tough, I think. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that, I know we've talked about it before, but the holes that have been created in our certainty about just about anything have almost become, well, I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but almost like gaping wounds. I mean, everything that we kind of took for granted, even the climate, you take for granted. You don't expect that you're going to be having these dreadful floods in different parts of the country at the moment, and yet it's becoming commonplace, and we're beginning to kind of accept it. And the whole thing about the NHS, it's our rock of certainty, isn't it, the NHS? But suddenly it isn't. It's quite fragile, and discovering that even the monarchy, the NHS, these sort of, I don't know, blocks in our certain wall. It's kind of all getting very
fragile.
Very fragile, and I was really interested, Adrian. You quoted to me something just yesterday by something you've been reading about that Auden had written, and it keeps rolling round like my mind. Can you?
I can't remember the exact words.
It's
all right. It's part of a poem called I think it's called As I Walked Out One Morning. I'm sure some people will know it really, really well. But it's about the fact that time catches up with all of us and teaches us that there is one kind of idealism that doesn't survive in the real world.
And that, I think, is just before you go on, is where I feel we are at. The idealism of the way we are as Christians, or the way the NHS operates, or that everybody. We heard a nurse, didn't we, saying, well, we love all our patients. Well, no, you probably don't all love all of your patients. It's just not like that, really. There's 1,000 reasons why people pursue a career, just as there's 1,000 reasons why people struggle with things. Nothing is blanket, and that's why I think out of the level of failure, these holes that have been punctured in our certainty about things, that's why I love that quote, Adrian.
Well, it struck me very heavily. It's quite a long poem with very interestingly constructed stanzas. But there's a verse, I think it might be the penultimate verse, where there's one line which struck me particularly. I'll just read you that one verse. And it's
all right, Adrian's just Googling on his phone, as we all do.
This is the one. Oh, stand at the window, as the tears scald and start. You shall love your crooked neighbour with your crooked heart.
Because none of us are perfect. None of us love perfectly. And I don't know. Yes, your neighbour's going to not be perfect either. But what we're called to do is that what you think it's about?
I don't know. I think it's a challenge to the idea that because you have a faith of some kind, or you have a belief that means something to you, that you are in some sense looking down on those who are broken and lost.
When you say looking down,
well, in a sense, wanting to, because of what you are, you have something to offer them. And I think what that line is saying is that you really have to give your broken self to broken people if you want to be really helpful. And the line has been going round and round my head ever since I read it. And I think it is, for me anyway, I can only talk about myself, a real challenge to the remaining vestiges in me, believing that because I am me, I have something to offer. And I find a real contentment in allowing the beginnings of an understanding that being broken, and I always said this and sort of knew it, but that being broken is the place to start, because we are, and we hear a lot of stuff about.
Well, we do, and some of it is beyond belief. I mean, we had an email this week. That's the last sort of email that we would dream of talking about or writing about, but such deep trauma and pain starting in childhood, and it sets up all those. In that poem, it talks about tears scalding your eyes, and it sets up all the questions suddenly rage in you, and all the uncertainties suddenly flood into you. How could this God? How could this happen? How could? Why? And all the questions.
There were two, weren't there? One, that was the one you mentioned. Also, another person whose close family, children in her family are going through a appalling illness.
Yeah, and it does. It just.
But it reminded me of another friend of ours who I was only laughing because when her husband died, and she adored her husband, she said to me, "Are there any Christian choruses with the word shitty in them, because I need to be able to say something like that." And when you're a young believer, or even a later believer, you kind of feel you're going to arm yourself with ways to help people with the things that you've learned or you've got. And I must say, and I think we've sort of said this before, that over the last 40 or so years, we've probably been more able to be useful to people through vulnerability than through strength.
Well, like we've said though, Adrian, I mean, the vulnerability tends to crash into our lives anyway. We do seem to be rather prone to things sort of falling flat on our faces, and I don't know.
But what people might say, well, what is the positive side of that? What can you say when someone has gone through something when it's broken your heart, and then you start to remember other things, perhaps from earlier in your life, when your life was pulled apart by selfishness and foolishness and stupidity by people who called themselves Christians.
Well, yes.
And suddenly you're in the world of pants, of suffering in ways that, unless you've been through that, you can't possibly understand. And there are no easy little answers to that.
No.
And I wouldn't even try.
And the danger is, of course, that you feel, because you haven't been through it, because you haven't experienced it, because you haven't any idea what to do or what to say, that you back off and think, well, it must be somebody else's job.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know. It's very tough. I just know that all those years ago, when you had a sort of crack up, there was one friend who stuck in it with you and listened to all the stuff that you were saying, most of which wasn't very nice about God and about just about everything else, but just kept in there and then walked with you out of it, really. And
never had much to say about anything
no,
to do with what was happening to me.
So I don't know, this crooked heart. The only thing is, I'm not sure about the word crooked. I mean, does that mean...
It's not crooked as it is. I can't remember what it was I read. Broken. No,
it was crooked neighbour with your crooked heart, wasn't it?
Was it something? I can't remember. but something like that.
But I suppose even that is right. That your heart's gonna. I don't mean yours. I mean anyone's heart is gonna have things in it you wish it wasn't there.
Well, absolutely, yeah. You can't get away from it. But just going back to what you said about handling people's pain, I'm sure I've always said something before, but one of the people I'm very grateful to was a lady who sat with me and said, "I want to tell you something," and she told me about something in her life that was pretty horrendous, and then she said, "Oh, there you go." And I said, "Where do I go?" She said, "Oh, you did the movement with your head, which meant, as it always means, oh no, I can't hear that, I can't hear that." Well, there's nothing wrong with reacting to something awful, but there is a point in not letting it be about you,
absolutely,
as opposed to the person who is going through it. And as Bridget knows, I mean, as I get older, more and more go back to the man, Jesus, the historical figure who was, also God, but a man with not flaws in the sense perhaps of being simple, whatever that means, but who went through pain and disappointment and a peculiar kind of failure every now and then in his life, but kept going through it by being, as you mentioned last week, you heard Michelle Obama talking about what was
going
the phrase?
High when others go low.
Going high and being truthful, and being prepared to go into the poo with people and not try to drag them out or say it'll be all right. And I can remember so many nights when people we knew or we come across were suffering, and I just wanted to make it all right.
Yeah.
I wanted to say to God, "Come on, you've let this happen, and then you let this happen, and then you let that happen, and then you tell me about it, and now I'm here, and now I've got it as well, and just make it okay." And I know from experience that really does not always happen.
No.
And living with that is another part of the job, if you like.
Yeah, but also just allowing that there's usually something funny somewhere in the middle of things, and
more often than not.
Than not. And one of the joys of the whole of this recording thing has been hearing stories of what have happened to other people, the times they've tried to do something wonderful and it just has gone so terribly wrong, like us buying the Perfect Puppy book and ending up unable to even train one very small puppy for a very long time. She's here looking at me and thinking this isn't fair, because she's a very nice dog now.
I think there should be a very severe culling of those who write books about the perfect way to do anything. The ones who write, the lady who wrote the book for you, not for you.
Thank you, Adrian.
It was given to you
Yeah.
by someone, and it was called, what was it?
I think it was The Perfect Christian Woman. She had very
Woman.
Shiny teeth, I remember, and very perfect hair.
All the better to bite you with.
And I mean, it's a total contrast to when I was so much younger and had 3 little boys at the time before we had Kate, and our house was always a bit chaotic, and there were always people walking through the door, and I thought, I'm doing quite well here, really. I mean, no, maybe not the perfect Christian woman, but I'm not doing too badly. And then somebody said, I love coming to your house, and I thought, this is great. And she said, it makes me feel so much better about my own when I get home.
Yes,
and I thought, oh, well, anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
Certainly not perfect anything, but yes, it has been almost like a journal doing this for 200 recordings, hasn't it? Little things we've thought and things that you've all told us, and we have really enjoyed the relationships may never meet you, but those have been lovely, haven't they? Hearing from people in Australia and and down the road.
Down the road. One of the things I do love is that often when people tell their story, they've been hurt or they've hit emotional crisis or whatever, but usually there's something in it that warms you. And one of the people who wrote this week, or just the last few days, was talking about a relationship with someone that was obviously truly wonderful.
Yeah.
And it was for years and years. And I blast against the bad things. I want to swear about the crappy stuff that happens to people, but I'm so grateful for the times when you're with somebody, and we've had each other for a long time.
We have.
When you're with someone who looked after you and really loved you and showed you what a relationship can really mean. I think that's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
So 2001, in theory, we'll be doing this recording from a different sitting room in a different house, just about 10 miles up the road. The biggest difference being that it's flat. It's a one-story house, commonly known as a bungalow, although we're so averse to moving into a bungalow that we'll have to give it a different name. But look forward to talking to you then.
The phone's going.
Yes, so goodbye. Bye-bye.
God bless you. Bye.